Please welcome Phil Anderson. He's the Managing Director and founder of Property Sharemarket Economics, PSE, an economic forecasting service operating out of London, Jakarta, and Melbourne. He is a trainer for investors who wish to understand economics and how the economy, share market, and property sector really works. Phil also wrote for Agora Inc., founded in 1979 and headquartered in Baltimore, Maryland, and one of the largest and most successful newsletter publishers in the world, and is the author of the widely acclaimed real estate book, The Secret Life of Real Estate and Banking, published in 2008. Please welcome Phil, and his topic is how to buy and sell stocks profitably. Not that any of us want to know that, hey?
Thank you, Max, for that introduction. Thank you to the ATAA once again for inviting me along. I figure it's about 30 years now since those glory days in the old Exchange building and Shell building and stuff. So welcome. I suspect in an hour and a half or a bit, I don't know if I'm going to be as popular then as I may or may not be now. We will see. I've got a lot to cover, so let's get right into it, I think is the best thing to do. It was great. It's good to come after the AI discussion. I found that quite useful to hear. Here's the thing though. This is the question nobody asks about AI. We all get into what it's all doing, and I agree it's got some promise. Nobody asks where the benefits flow or will flow. Now, I hope you know the answer to that question already. The benefits are going to flow to the land. That's what everybody misses. And so all the benefits, computers, everything else that we've had, is it any wonder land price is so expensive now? And you can see the effects of this. And if by the end of today, I hope, one of the things I've always tried to pass on in my talks is, it's my opinion, my contention, that if you can understand what land is and how it gets its earnings, it will make you a much better investor. And so you can just look outside. If you just have a look out there, for those who can see it, online perhaps not, but we're on Russell Street in Melbourne, and you will notice that on this street, and Melbourne has a pathetic local government rating system, which is why you can still see the outstanding results of Melbourne being very poor, the CBD being very poorly developed. You can still see, if you look there in the middle of Russell Street there, they're two-storey walk-ups, but the buildings are taller on the corners. That is an expression of land value. And you might say, well, there's a bit of an exception because we're in a building that's 14, 15 stories high, which is also in the middle of the street. But immediately on the right-hand side, as we look at it, there's an access lane, which permits the higher buildings, right? And so the reason why the reason why Sydney is so much more developed building-wise than Melbourne is because Melbourne taxes its buildings, Sydney does not. Okay, so if you can start to get to see that, I think you will become a much better investor. Let me try and show you briefly, and then we get on to the stocks. So let me read for you again how to buy and sell stocks profitably, which in an hour or so, I'm quite certain that you'll see how this is, but I'm not certain you'll be happy with why this is. The future of trading, I think, is going to be nothing but the repetition of history, and AI will continue this history into the future. In this presentation, I'm going to take you on a historical journey, show you what you need to know, and display for you the timing of how history repeats. And it's the timing you've got to get right. Then I'm going to relate this yearly timing to the US stock markets, then by default other markets. By the end, I'm going to try and make sure that you can have a decent knowledge of the right-hand side of the chart, not the left-hand side of the chart. The right-hand side of the chart, the the time frame that actually hasn't happened yet. So that's the idea. Okay, you can get me on propertysharemarketeconomics.com. Let's go. So, intro. I was lucky enough. I've always had a bent for economics, and the old school stuff I did, it was my subject that I put most time into, and particularly at university as well, when I did a economics and accounting degree just down the road at RMIT. The history and the economics professors there, they could not explain what was happening in economics at the time, and I was bereft really that they couldn't explain to me the way the economy actually worked. So I decided to just for you guys to cut a long story short, went right around the world. I decided I'd go travelling, and I decided that I wouldn't come back home until I had found out how economies really work. So I wanted to see the people on the ground. So I got into some pretty interesting situations around the world. We're talking 1985, 1986, this is pre-internet and pre all those things where you had to write letters back to your mum to tell her what was happening and everything else and various things. And if you wanted to collect a letter, it was post restant at the post office where you were going to next, and you know, all the other stuff. Thank heavens all that's gone. I did find out, I had an epiphany in India. I did find out what it was all about, and it is all about the land. And as luck would have it, one of the remaining Henry George groups still functioning in the world happened to be in Melbourne. They were in Hardware Lane at the time, and I went and joined, and I was given, they knew my interest in both markets and real estate and stocks and things, and I got a hold of this book. The book was from Fred Harrison, and the book was published in 1983, and it purported to say that there was, according to Fred, an 18-year real estate cycle, and the previous trough in 1974, 18 years of growth, would be terminated going into the late 1980s, the next trough at 1992, as per the published forecast. Now, I was reading that book in 1991. That sure impressed me. I was working in a family business at the time, very good, but it's not easy working with the family. And when I got onto here, I thought to myself, now, if that was realistic, and Fred had done the UK economy, if that was really realistic, I thought I could study the US economy and make a business for myself. Because basically I found, after a number of years of working when I was very young, I found that I'm probably unemployable. I don't like being told what to do. I mean, who does? But really, it was a serious issue with bosses and various things. So, you know, I just thought, well, heck, I've clearly got to run my own company and run my own business. And I thought, well, you know, economics, let's see if I can work out an economic forecasting service, which I established. I went down to Ross House and they let me in because my first studies were on rating systems. And I worked out that if I could study the US market, what the land was doing and everything else, I might have a business because there's more money in the US than anywhere else, so I could explain stuff. So I went researching. Again, this is pre-internet. I mean, I started work back in 1979. We had, as a trainee accountant at night school as well, hand ledgers. I mean, it's mind-boggling the changes that have been made, bearing in mind again, all those changes and everything that happens, the benefits end up going into the land market and the stocks that control those monopolies in the land market. And I did some research, and I want to cover the next couple of slides fairly quickly so we can leave plenty of time for questions. When I eventually found land data from the US from 1800, when the federal government started from May 10, 1800, lo and behold, the speculative fervours that took place in the huge amount of land that the US had, starting from both coasts, or particularly from the east coast and then working inwards, you can see there clearly the speculative blow-offs the speculative blow-offs, I mean, you had what, 1818, then you go up there, what have we got? 1830s, 1854, 1869, 1872 in Chicago, 1888, 1908. The next peak was in Florida in 1926, precisely 18 to 19 years. I thought, then is when I thought I had a business. Now this was I've said this many times before, and so indulge me if you will, it just helps me start these talks. You know, our family had some big decisions to make with real estate markets and buying of commercial buildings back in 1991, and it was Fred's book that cemented it. You know, I said, Dad, if Fred's right, then we're going to see another, really a start of the cycle, 1991, 92. Now, you know, I think most of us are youngish, oldish enough to remember how Melbourne was in 1991. It was pretty, I mean, it was almost depression standards, really. But we managed to say that if Fred was right, that gave us another big boom right up until 2007 or thereabouts. So you can see, and as it turned out, that's precisely what happened. Carrying on from the Second World War, you can see that we've got here UK real house prices in the black, US in the red. Don't get hung up on it too much, but you can see clearly peaks in 1973. There's minor peaks, the mid-cycle slowdown, 1981, 82, led to the peak in 1989, another peak 2006, 2007, down into lows we thought would happen around 2011, 2012 or thereabouts. What odds did that give for another peak in 14 years later, 2026? And so here we are, roughly. Okay, so that then led me to establish my clock. If I had my time again, I'd probably do it a little bit different, but starting from the bottom, really, you get on the inner side of the circle, the first half, which goes around here, then you move to the second half of the cycle, after the mid-cycle slowdown, second half, and going around, and so on. This is all based on earnings. And so generally, the start from the beginning, so 2010, 2011, perversely really, net rents rise. And once it becomes cheaper to build than to buy existing houses, that's when developers get into business. That really kicks off the cycle, kicks it off right in through there. Then the stock market recovers, goes up, goes well, until you get a mid-cycle slowdown about 11 o'clock, then to 1300, 1400, 1500, real estate activity frenetic, the peak, and then activity starts to slacken. I did my book. When I sold my business in 1999, I retired to France and tried to put my book together. So, that's a quick summary of how I started. I've noticed that there are two issues when I try to give my talks, so I want to put this in perspective for the next couple of minutes, because if I don't do the next 5 or 10 minutes, when I draw my conclusions, you may or may not have a bit of a hard time believing that this is possible. Now, I know some of you have seen some of these things before, but if you're new to this, I suggest that you might be leaving a little bit scratching your head and saying, it isn't possible what Phil is about to show you. So let's just do it and see where we go. The first problem I have when I'm doing some of my talks is I tend to sound like just another economist. And as you can tell, if you look at the history, I don't think there's just not almost no economists that actually, do they really know what they're talking about? You know, they make all these forecasts, and I know they work hard. I don't want to belittle them. They work hard within the knowledge and the frame set that they've got. But we are also programming into AI exactly the same mindset, and it's not going to be helpful because the critical problem hasn't been put in there yet, the critical issue. Now here's the thing. If I get this pen, and if I was to drop this pen, nobody in the room is going to say the pen's going to go upwards. We all know that gravity's going to pull it downwards to the earth. That's because we accept and understand, perhaps the current president in the US excluded, we tend to understand that there is a law of gravity, it's a scientific fact, and the pen is just going to go down this way. Unfortunately, the fundamental law of economics has been completely and deliberately written out of economics. And that fundamental law is the law of economic rent. Once you get to understand the law of economic rent, you know that economics is and always will be a science, and you can start to make some accurate forecasts once you understand that science. So that brings me to the second thing. So you have to actually start to understand earnings. Now, I feel I'm amongst friends here, so I can probably romp through this a little bit because I'm pretty certain that you'll have some sort of understanding of PEs and earnings and those sorts of things because you're sort of, you're in that field where it sort of comes up all the time. Okay, so maybe if I may be a little bit presumptuous in trying to move through this just a little quickly because I do want to leave plenty of time for questions. So this is a bit interactive the next couple of minutes. It's also perhaps a little bit rhetorical, but how do you know what you're worth? You have to have some way of defining, perhaps in a monetary sense, when you try and sell yourself or your business, how do you know what the price of that business is? Now, of course, it comes back to earnings. So to try and keep this simple but without being simplistic, if you run a hairdressing business from home and you decide that you've had enough of hairdressing and you want to move on to something else, you want to sell the business, how do you know what to sell it for? So the usual thing is you'll head off to your accountant and you want to maximise the sales price, and the person you're selling to wants to minimise that price. But as a general rule, the accountant will tell you, well, how much did you make for the year? What were your earnings? And so you'll probably say, well, I cut so many hairs and haircuts and everything else. I was able to earn, say, just for one of a figure, I was able to earn $50,000, 50,000 Australian dollars for the year. And then your accountant's probably going to say, well, the business is probably worth, and that's the sort of figures that they come up with, twice earnings, which means the price of your business is going to be about 100,000, something to sell. Now, essentially, the person buying is really buying your database as such. All that sounds all fair so far? Okay. Take Commonwealth Bank. What's the price of Commonwealth Bank roughly at the moment? Roughly 160, say 170, something like that. Does anybody know the dividend it pays, what its earnings are? No, it's more than $2, isn't it? Yeah, well, let's say for want of an example, it was paying, to make it easy, it was paying $10 per share. Okay, so the earnings of $10 per share per year, the price is 170, what's the PE? 17? In other words, how many years to get your money back? 17 years as a general guide. Now, leaving aside why it might be 170, because clearly there will be cyclical things that influence that. Sometimes investors are prepared to pay more for the earnings. Sometimes in a downturn they're prepared to pay less. But I'm just trying to focus on earnings at the moment. Now here's the thing. Picture the land at the moment. The land price across the road, or the land price across in, if you went out towards Berwick, or if you went out towards Craigieburn, what's the price of land out there for a house block? 200,000, 300,000, or am I dreaming? whatever it is. Why does that land like that have a price? There's no labour in it, there's no manufacturing, there's no costs as such, but it is largely, of course, location. So let me explain location for a little bit. The guys that started the big issue, which started in San Francisco, which I thought was a great idea, to put some of the homeless back to work, give them a job and some respect, put them selling the magazine on street corners. Now, those guys are actually pretty street smart, and they very quickly discovered in San Francisco, amongst other places, that for the same application of labour, you could sell more magazines in the middle of the CBD than you could miles on the outskirts up at on the bridge, say, of San Francisco. And so, being very quick to know that, people started getting up earlier to get the best location, the best site, which they would then defend with knives and guns to make sure somebody else couldn't get that little square piece of dirt. Now, isn't this describing current US presidents and just about all presidents before them? What are they after? Locational value. That is economic rent. It's the value above the margin. Now, here's the thing which nobody gets, and it's really, really important. We're all used to living in a society today that has a very expensive land price and we consider it normal, but it isn't. So let me give you two examples. Let us say that I decide to go into politics and I'm the great-great-great-great-grandson of Karl Marx. And I go into politics and I have one sole platform. My platform is that I'm going to tax all corporations and I'm going to tax 100% of their profits. Now, let's say times are difficult and the electorate swings left. They love my policies, I get elected. If I tax all the corporations at 100% of profits, what's going to be the price of their shares? Pretty much coming down to zero, right? Now, do you think that policy is feasible? Probably if that was the case. I mean, like they found in Russia, nobody would start businesses, really, because if you're going to be taxed, why would you bother? You get that, right? Clearly, common sense. Now, let us say I was the great-great-great-grandson of Henry George. Now, you may or may not know who Henry George was. Look him up at some point. And my policy, and let's say everybody's absolutely sick to death of all politicians and I become wildly popular, but my policy is only one tax. My policy is to get rid of every single other tax, of which there's 140 in Australia, dump them all, but only have one tax. And I'm going to tax the land and I'm going to collect the economic rent. Let's say there's, I don't know, I managed to rig the elections, whatever it is, because I imagine it would be a very unpopular policy, mostly, which it is today. But let's say I get elected and I put that into practice. Get rid of all the taxes, only one, and I'm collecting the economic rent. And as a byproduct of that, whatever gets collected, because we won't need much of government anymore, don't need a tax department, don't need anything else, get rid of them. I decide what I collect over and above normal expenses, I give back to you as a citizen's dividend. But aside from that, if I decide to tax the economic rent at fully 5% of the price, what's going to be the price of land? Zero. Now, any economy anywhere in the world can do that without actually having any other consequences to the economy. It will actually make the economy much more productive because there couldn't be any land speculation. So, the point of what I'm trying to do is not to change your mind, and I'm not here to preach. What I'm trying to get to illustrate is, if you can imagine a society in which land has no price, it still has earnings, but you're just taxing it away. If land has no price, then I think if you can get to understand that, that will make you a super duper much improved investor, as it has done for me. And now I want to show you why. Because if we do not collect the economic rent, the surplus value over and above the application of labour to the same site, if we do not collect that extra value or price, then, and here's the key, it's the key to everything I do, society must get a real estate cycle. Must. It's like death and taxes. It absolutely must happen. We must get a real estate cycle if we don't collect the economic rent. The only question that remains after that is, why has the alleged real estate cycle in the US been so incredibly, it has remained at so faithfully 18 to 19 years, average 18.6. That's really the only question that's left, because we have to get a real estate cycle if land is permitted to have a price. And the cycles will explode at the end of the cycle into the extreme, because, and it's even worse now than it was before, because banks now have worked out a way to monetize that economic rent. They do that with a mortgage. You cannot get a mortgage without pledging the future earnings of land to the bank. And that is what gives real estate, or the cycle, so much volatility. So the end, the extreme top of every cycle will be dependent upon how much credit is being created by the banks. And at the moment, as every cycle, I don't see that reducing, because all of us want to go to the bank, tell the bank how good we are, how our behaviour is so fantastic at repaying loans, please give me a mortgage, please give me a loan. So it's just expanding exponentially, right? Are you all with me so far? You can see all that? Okay. So, once I came to learn that we had to get a real estate cycle, then I realised I had a bit of a business here, explaining it to investors and to other people. You can see that the real estate cycle starts to have 4 phases. Now again, the next couple of slides I'd like to go through reasonably quickly, so we can get to the much more important material, because there's some utterly incredible stuff that you can research now related to stock markets, which is where more important to us, that involve the real estate cycle and the things that are happening. So let me get into that now. So 4 things that are involved in the cycle, 4 phases. The cycle begins out of the wreckage of the previous one. Now we saw that, let me give you some direct examples. We saw that back in 2008, 9, 10, 11, if you think back like that. The catalyst, does anybody know what the catalyst was in 2010 that kicked off the current cycle that we're in? Anybody want to have a guess at all? What was really the catalyst? Always comes back to earnings. The catalyst was Airbnb. Suddenly, after 2010, you could put your property or your house on the market for rent on a weekly basis, not yearly. It practically overnight doubled earnings. If earnings double, what happens to price? Has to go up. It must. Mid-cycle slowdown, we get a plateau, generally minor fall in economic activity for a few months to a year. That is 7 years in. From the bottom, 7 years in. If you know your GAN material, 7 years, 360 weeks, 1 cycle. Then we get the boom. That's what we're in now. Like phase 1, but with the addition of greater economic confidence, expansion, conspicuous consumption, lavish government spending. That is because in the first half of every cycle, the economic rent has to manifest. It has to be worked at again. It has to recover. In the second half of the cycle, you will see those who earn prodigious rent, they start to spend it, which is what the Saudis are doing now, because after all, oil is basically economic rent. Small production cost, but not much. Then the cyclical peak, crash recovery, after the extreme, okay? Now, that's how we have done that with my co-director Akil, breaking down the cycle. As a sort of, I think it's a better guide than what my clock was, right? It just makes it look a little bit better. First upswing, return to growth. Then we get the mid-cycle slowdown. Second upswing, the big boom. Fred gave that a name, the final 2 years of the second 7 years, the final 2 years, the winner's curse, which we're in at the moment. 2 years winner's curse. And then roughly 4 years peak, crash and recovery. Since 1955, that's almost been month perfect. Since 1955, it's been quite incredible. Okay, let me take an interlude for a minute, because this is very important. I am what you call a GAN fan, a GAN man. I've had many lucky things in my life, two of which was the discovery of Henry George via Fred Harrison, and the second thing was the discovery of W.D. Gann. I assume here everybody's heard of Gann. Yes? Anybody hasn't heard of Gann? Yeah, okay. Remarkable what that man was able to do. One of the things he did do, and so we are looking now at 119 years of Dow Jones information, and back almost 120 years, you can see that years 1 and 2 have always been down years in markets. Years 3 recovery, years 4, and years, or I should say years 0 and 1, beg your pardon, starting at year 0. Year 5, looking back 120 years, to year 5, counting the decade from 0 through to 9, year 5 has always been by far the strongest year of the decade. And again, look what we've had. You could have known that before 2025 started. You were looking at the eventual strong year. Now, it's not, look, I'm not saying it's guaranteed, obviously, but on the probabilities, 2025 was looking like all prior years and ended in 5, pretty strong. That came from my good friend. The way that is worked out, Andy Pancholi puts out some good information. And then we had the decade cycle, Gann's decade cycle. So I'll put this in a chart. If you, I've related this to the All Ordinary. So if you're going back to the data back to the 1920s, roughly 1936, I think it was. If you overlay each decade, year 0 to year 9, if you overlay them and then sort of bring them all together, you're getting a chart like it looks there with years 5, you can see 5, 6, up into year 7. That top there comes into August, September of the year ended in 7, significantly 90 months from the start, okay? So, keep those things in mind if you would. So let's break down the cycle again like we had it before. And what I'm going to do for you now, each particular cycle, so 1955 to roughly 1977, I'm going to overlay now, just so you can see it, just do this quickly so that you can see I'm not just cherry picking stuff. Once we'd all done this, I then asked Akil years ago to get the UK building data and overlay it. So you can see, just before we do that, can you see year ended in 1, mid-cycle slowdown, right? That's the house prices and building information from 1955 through to 1977. Can you see the big stuff at the end, right? Boom went right over the top. augmented a little bit because we had high inflation. Then we got the next cycle, 1977 roughly, up 1989 peak, 1993 lows. That's how that cycle looked. UK data. You can see that, right? And then from 1993 to 2011, 12. And now we were doing this back in 2012 and 13. So that these charts, this information was first presented in 2014 to my subscribers. So we were doing it pretty much at the time. And that's how that looked. So there's an approximate fit. So we're not just cherry picking. Also as well, bank lending. And you can see bank lending right at the extremes falls off a cliff as we get into the extreme. Once things turn over, which they will do soon, once things turn over, banks, they do the exact things that are going to make the downturn worse. They call in the loans, they don't issue new ones, they do all the stuff that they say they'll never do. And I'd envisage, again, somewhere out up here, we're not there yet, we'll see another cliff moment. Okay, we're all right so far? All right. Now, here's where we sort of step off the planet a little bit, maybe. I was just so fortunate. Somebody back in 1995, way back, somebody gave me this, but that's not the original. What you've got in front of you has been slightly adjusted. I'm not going to tell you how or why, but it's not hard to work out. You might find this a little bit hard to believe, but it's why I think it's so important to know that there is a real estate cycle. When I was first given this document way back in 1995, I had no idea what it was. It was just really a set of numbers. What you do have on every column split, so you've got from here, what is it, 19 years to the next one, then 18, then 19, and so on. So it's a column of every 18 to 19 years. And what you have along the bottom, and I hope you can, is it sort of legible, sort of not? Let me read out at the bottom, you've got 1803, 1822, 1840, 41, 1859, 1860, 1877, 1878, 1896, 1897, 1914, 1915, and then the numbers A, B, C, and D, and so forth. Once I started researching my book, those numbers along the bottom stood out because they were the extreme lows of the United States real estate cycle. And here was this document, purportedly put out by Gann in 1909. Nobody disputes that. It is reasonable to suggest that Gann did put that out in 1909. They've found out that it was around at that particular time, so nobody seems to question it. But you have to question it when we're about to do the next example, which I want to show you. So you've got a handout in front of you. I don't quite know how this might work for those zooming in, but we'll do our best, perhaps. Perhaps if they're obviously connected, maybe they can pull up a chart of the Dow from, if they have it, going back from about 1914 to 1934. That's what you've got in front of you. Is there a spare one somewhere? Can I borrow one? Because I handed one out but didn't get one myself. Okay, so if you can look on with Steve, that'd be fabulous. I'll get it back to you. So we are running now. Now this, in Gann's time, if Gann was looking at this document, it's in the future. It hadn't happened yet. It has for us now. We are going down here where I've put, so keep your eye on keep your eye on that, the column which I have highlighted with the dark line. So we're running from 1914 to 1934. Now, it just so happened, 1914 was the low of that previous real estate cycle. There wasn't a lot of speculation that took place into 1914 because the 1893 downturn in the US had been so severe, probably worse than 1929, but we don't have a lot of photographs back to that era, so it's not so visual. But 1893 was a really serious downturn. It just, in Australia, I think there was only one bank left standing, which led to, just by the by, led to the establishment of Canberra when the Australian Federation in 1901, all the states got together. All of the politicians, both conservative and non-conservative, in the first Australian Federation, when they met, they didn't meet in Canberra then because it hadn't started, but alternating between Melbourne and Sydney, they all decided when Canberra was going to be built that nobody would be able to speculate in land in Canberra. And so Canberra was one of the world's first cities designed along the lines of Henry George. It was designed by Walter Burley Griffin, who was the president of the Chicago Henry George Club. And in Canberra, if you wanted to settle in Canberra after 1927, you had to lease the property and you had to build on it soon. So you couldn't speculate. Okay, so Canberra's a great original item highlighting what you can do when you collect the economic rent. Now, it just so happened another politician came along, Gordon, I think his name was, made himself wildly popular by getting rid of that system and handing back that land value all at once to the voters. Got him elected, wildly popular, then the banks could go berserk and start lending on that value, right? Okay, that's the whole system behind the system. Anyway, getting back to the 1909 timetable. Believe it or not, now I'm not aware that Gann understood per se the real estate cycle. What Gann did understand that there was an 18.6 year cycle. It did apply to the US stock market, and Gann rediscovered that the US markets will only, this is hard to believe, will only ever move in a certain way in a certain year. And this is what Gann came along and said. And he put it out. So he said in 1914, 1915A, the stock market, extreme low stock prices. Can you see where we're reading off? We're reading off there. So every 18 to 19 years, the US stock market will show extreme low stock prices, strikes, repression, despair, beginning of new business generation for the next 18 and 3/5 years, 4 years of rising stock prices and improved business, markets bear of goods, young men become prominent. That led to 1919B, high stock prices. Can you see there, 1919B, high stock prices? This is Gann in the future, right? We then had 1921C, panic. Can you see the panic, 1921? Then 1922D, low stock prices, recovery then, leading to 1924E, high stock prices. And you can see there that point, late 1924, the US stock market breaks into all-time new highs. Just as it did in 2013, but this time in the first half of the real estate cycle. And I'm on record, you can see it on my YouTube channel. I was discussing this with Dan Denning back at the time. He was working for Phillip Publishing. I said to him, the US stock market just broke into all-time new highs in 2013. That is confirming for you the start of the next part of this real estate cycle, which will run into 2026. And whenever a stock market breaks into all-time new highs, it's very bullish. When a stock market with prices breaks into all-time new highs, what does it mean? It means the earnings of the economy are improving. That's why prices break into all-time new highs. So, bearing in mind, and this is where I think, you know, there's a lot of criticism on Gann around but his brilliance is understated. And this is where if you get into Gann a bit more closely, you can have a look at 1924 on your chart. Gann produced one of his books called The Truth of the Stock Tape, and he published that in 1923. And basically he spent a good part of that book showing people how to find the strongest stock in the strongest sector. He said, when you do that, you buy when it breaks out. Simple as that. And he did that 1 year before the American stock market broke into all-time new highs in the biggest bull market that at that time the world had ever seen. Now that's pretty prescient. In my opinion, Gann knew that was coming. That's why he wrote his book that way. Yes? And if you buy Truth of the Stock Tape and Wall Street Stock Selector, the two books in one, the Lambert Gann now, that got all of Gann's original material, they posthumously put Gann's 1929 forecast in the back of those two books. So you get a bit of a bonus. So you can see just how good Gann was. So Gann put out his 1929 forecast in November of 1928, and he said the Dow would bottom on March 28 and it would top on September 3. And that is exactly what happened. And he warned all his clients. He said, you have to get out before the end because a very bad recession is coming, because it is at the end of the 18 and 3/5 cycle. So we will be going into, down there, we will be going into 1930, J, major panic crash. And he did say, you can look at it, 1928, H, very high stock prices. Can you see that? Now that's impressive, right? Isn't it? By any stretch of the imagination. Now that hasn't stopped. If you carry that through, which we've done, we got to the bottom. You can see the bottom through there. 2007 K, 2008, same as A, plus strikes, unemployment, many prominent deaths. So what odds by the time you get the low, and you can see as you went, if you went from 2008 and you just took the next cycle, say 2009 as the low, in 4 years' time getting rising stock prices to an all-time high, that's precisely what happened in 2013, the next cycle, yes? I had an idea that was probable. Did I know it was coming at the time? No, but I am on record in some fairly major publications of having written that to expect the kickoff of the next cycle. And when Airbnb developed in 2010, by 2011 I was able to recognise clearly, because of my land knowledge, that Airbnb were going to clearly add to the earnings of land, which meant the prices had to go up, which meant the prices of established buildings went up, which then meant it became cheaper to build. That is your cycle, and it's all based on earnings. There's nothing non-scientific about it. It's earnings. That's why you've got to understand that stuff. So if you go through from there, I won't do this here, but if you go through from there, you get into a potential where you've got 2025, 2026, thereabouts, J, major panic crash. Now, if you've been, and there's many people here that have been following me for that amount of years, the turning of the cycle, the past, in this particular current cycle, has been pretty much pinpoint perfect. So if we just, I won't go back, but so that's the financial timetable. There's plenty of those on the internet now if you want to look it up. I was a bit silly enough to entrust that information to a few people, then posted it everywhere, but that's all right. It's a bit like you've got to know how to interpret that before anything else. So I feel I'm amongst friends here. ATAA has been good to me over the years, so I wanted to share a little bit of stuff. Okay, so far. It's a little hard to believe, wouldn't you agree? To think that actually the market can do only certain things in certain years. But that is roughly what happens. Now, bear with me for a minute, we'll get back to that. So, following on a little bit from what Gan was doing, myself and my co-director, Akil, for about since 2005 now, for my own purposes and now for my subscribers, we do what we call a roadmap. So essentially, we put this out, I try to put it out roughly end of December, sometimes goes into January of each year. We put out what we think. All we're doing is we're taking every year ended in 5, stacking it on top of one another, and see what it might look like. And that's what we've come up with. So you can see there, the black line is all the years ending in 5 back to 1895. Years ending in 5, that's how they look. You might notice there is a pronounced dip from March into April in a year's ended in 5. It's exactly what we got again. There is also a pronounced October slowdown. Just a little. We then, because we look at things in a real estate cycle perspective, we added to that, this is what Gan wasn't doing, we added to it our blue line, whereby we only stack on top of each other every year ended in 5 that was in the second half of the real estate cycle. And that's what that looked like with the blue line. Then we just put 10, the key numbers from Gan, the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 90 and 120. We left out a few, that gives us the red line. But what we also do, which Gan suggested the more important numbers, 20 and 60. So look, Gan was always looking for his best knowledge, I think he was looking 20 years back and 60 years back. And that is the grey line there, which gave us some interesting things to look at. All good so far? Yes, okay. So there's the actual with the dark green line. We're up to about, it's a month old now, but that gives you some idea, whereby we were looking for a March retracement, bottoming in April, up until September 21, slight retracement for the end of September, and then stronger growth, stronger in the stock market, and a pretty bullish end to the year. Okay. Now we use that as our guide. It's just simply based on what Gan was doing, but we call that our crystal ball. Okay. Now we get to the quintessential question. How do you trade all of this? Now, in my humble opinion, and I learnt this from Gan, buy high, sell higher. If you do anything else, I think you're making a mistake. And I get the number of times, you know, this just came out of the paper the other day, and it was in the Financial Times, 9th of September, on page 11, where they had this guy, a fairly knowledgeable guy. He said, the buy low, sell high approach is no longer a safe bet. Well, I think buying low and selling high has never been a safe bet. How do you know what the low is? How do you know what the high is? Then you've got to start to get into all sorts of judgments and opinions and various sort of things. And I'll just quote for you the paragraph or two. Many of us in markets were reared to believe that the key to investing in stocks was to buy low and sell high. We buy our little dream, sell it. The philosophy implies the buying stocks with a cheap valuation on metrics like price to forward earnings with high free cash flow yield. Important. The truth is, in most cases, such an approach has been declining in usefulness, blah, blah, blah. This is what I think in a bull market Gan was trying to do. Buy high, sell higher. Again, how do you try and do that? So, I discovered Gann put every single thing he knew, all his secrets, they're all in his books. They're not hidden. But most people, when they study Gann, they just read his book. And that's a fatal mistake. When Gann gives you an illustration, like he does with Mexican Pete, when he does Mexican Pete, he says in 1918 advanced to 98, February reacted to 90, and you go through all the prices, you think, oh, I can't be bothered going through all that. What's he doing all that for? What's it mean? But when you reconstruct, because it's a chart, when you draw a chart of what he's saying, and he puts some charts in and not others, when you actually reconstruct the chart, Gann's clearly saying you buy high with a view to selling higher. So in other words, you are trying to buy at a key breakout level. Not only that, I learned from Mexican Pete itself, I learned about midpoints from there. Yes? Midpoints have made me so much money. And even more when midpoints happen on a particular day. So if you get a midpoint coming up on an equinox, for example, on a time date or a time count, you can learn so much. So effectively, so what stock have we got there? That's a stock, the Lottery Corporation, TLC, goes sideways for ages. Then you get rising bottoms. Pretty simple. Buy high, sell higher. Right in there. Now, there's a lot behind this, and this is where I often get myself into trouble. But this is what I learned as an economist from John Maynard Keynes, who, as it happened, was at the time an economist with decent knowledge. He didn't understand the land market, but he did know how to get economies out of recessions, and he said government should spend more. What he failed to see that was, in good times, government would spend more as well to keep voters happy. Now we're in the situation we are in, where there is just so much debt floating around from governments, we may get defaults, which is another interesting thing in itself. The default won't happen. The default can only happen only if and when land price turns down in the United States. Nothing will happen. They will be able to muddle through. I can guarantee you this. America will not have any problems. I mean, they've got a few problems, but America, things won't get worse unless and until American land price turns down, which it has started to do in Florida. So we're at an interesting inflection point. It's when land price turns down that you start to see who's been swimming naked as such. Getting back to John Maynard Keynes. Mr. Keynes had a very good analogy of the stock market. You may have heard this, you may have not, but it's worth repeating again. He said the stock market is very similar to a beauty contest. So if you were to imagine 5 handsome men and 5 lovely ladies up here, and it was your job to pick who's the most beautiful and who's the most handsome. Now clearly, we've all got opinions on that. And there'll be as many opinions as there are economists. They'll all be something different. John Maynard Keynes changed the equation slightly because he said it's a contest, so there's going to be judges sitting at the side to actually pick Mr. Universe and Miss Universe. Now when that happens, when there's judges across to the side, can you see how your job changes a little bit, or at least you should see how your job changes a little bit. Now, your opinion of the people up here, your opinion now is completely, utterly irrelevant. It simply doesn't matter. So you can go through and you can rate the persons, you can rate the men on muscles and the women on the height and the attractiveness and whatever else it is we do or don't do. But at the end of the day, once the judges are there, I would have thought you'd be better off taking all the judges out to dinner and asking them who they're going to vote for, especially if there's a prize for selecting who the judges end up choosing. Now, that is exactly the same in the stock market. And Gann, I think, intuitively knew this, and Gann simply said, buy there. Because that is where the market thinks this corporation is going to have increasing earnings in the future. And as I'm sure, you know, I can talk here, it's great to talk to a group like this because you are, if I may say, the education level about markets is a little higher than the normal public. So I can say to you, and you would know as well from Dow theory, that generally markets price in earnings 6 months before they happen. So generally, once you get this sort of breakout, it's Mr. Market telling you that this corporation is likely to, in a few months' time, issue an earnings guidance or an earnings report that will be bullish. Now, all the amateurs that come into the stock market for the first time, they get to this point up the top when the company issues a fantastic report and the price drops. And these guys, these newbies, they scratch their head and think, I've just bought fantastic news. Why doesn't the price go up? Well, you know the answer to that, don't you? Because the market knew it 6 months before. There's nothing illegal about that. It's just that corporations tend to issue these sorts of things and market gets wind of it and the earnings calls that go out, public knowledge, and there you have it. So if you get to that point there, and in the old days, oh God, the old days, the number of times we get to this point here and I'd speak to my broker and my broker would say, oh, we don't think that company's any good. Now, are they trying to say that to stop the buying so they can be buying? I don't know. My knowledge says they do, right? But I can't say how I know that, but I learned it. Fortunately now it's all tech and it's all, you know, we've removed them from the play and everything else. So, your opinion here, your opinion there of what you think the stock's going to do is just completely irrelevant. It really is, because after that breakout, on all probabilities, it's not certain, but on all probabilities, price is going up. You then have to do only one thing. You just have to set a stop loss. Actually, you have to do two things. You have to set a stop loss. Stop loss, pretty basic for me, it just goes under there. Now, I'm not going to go into other stuff you can see on there, but you can apply time counts, you can apply midpoints into all the stuff that goes on here. Sometimes you're lucky enough, like Mr. Gann showed, you can actually forecast about here that the stock's going to break. So sometimes you get a cheat sheet. So I'm going to leave you to analyse that sort of thing. It means studying Gann's books, reading his charts, and then work out, because at this point that hasn't happened yet, but Mr. Gann will show you how from here you can forecast what's going to happen next. Not only that, he shows ways where you can forecast at what price the first ending will stop and the potential day that might happen. Not always, but I have done that on occasions. The second thing you've got to do then, once you set your stop, and this is the hardest thing for me to do, you actually have to do nothing. And this is the hardest thing of all to do, because we all know what happens. You buy in, the price goes up, you get up to here, every morning you look at the price to see if it's gone up even higher, which is of course the worst thing to do, because then you start thinking, then you're thinking short term, thinking, oh, should I take money here, should I take the profit, what's it going to do next? You see a bad report come out from the US overnight. AI is now saying that, giving you all the wrap up, all the knowledge, it's making you allegedly so much smarter, but really the smartest thing to do is absolutely nothing. Now, this is just what I do. I have found this to be far less stressful than anything else. It is not a day trading system. You know, you have to do your own work on that sort of stuff, but it does mean that I can just get a bit... I discovered for myself, when I learned about trading, I discovered for myself that I would make, much to my disgust really, I would make a very poor general, because I don't make very good decisions under pressure. And as you would know, if you're in the market all the time, you are getting constant pressure. So it makes the market very hard. So I said, look, I can't do that. That's just not me. Some people do it very well. I know some people that just make really, really good decisions under pressure. The more pressure they get, the better they perform. This is not me. I don't like the pressure. So I much rather try to do something like this, and I just leave things go. So then back to the clock. Now, this is what the real estate cycle, this is what the land market will tell you about the stock market. And would you believe certain stocks will always perform, or have in the past, likely to in the future. Certain stocks will perform better at certain times. And so when you get around this side of the market, it goes in this order. And we're talking about the US, housing stocks, banks, gold, copper, silver. Then it's the end. It's been happening 200 years. I show this in my book, especially about copper. So here we have, it shouldn't be DR, I think it's DH Horton. So far, the top for DR Horton back in the prior cycle was July 2005. In the current cycle, second half of the cycle, you can see the outperformance start. You can see key times when it breaks out. There's a good one. Now, this is why you have to know how to read a chart and why it's so helpful to know what part of the real estate cycle you're in. Strictly speaking, when that happened, that's telling me, see the stocks were going sideways at highs right through March and April of 2023. People remember what was happening in 2023? Silicon Valley Bank. All the pundits come out and said that the US market would collapse. But if you know how to read a chart and you know what part of the real estate cycle you're in, see it going sideways, that was telling you that housing stocks were about to have their run, their final run, despite what was going on with Silicon Valley Bank. This is what makes the market so confusing if you don't understand the land market. So putting them side by side, DR Horton, it's a US house builder, topped in July 2005. Here's what we've got at the moment, September 24, the top. Can you see how last cycle it came back to try and breach the prior top, went up about 87%, then it fell. Can you see the similar thing at the moment happening here? Yeah? I think this is telling you, so far, the repeat, the American market's on its last legs. Taking that a bit further, US home builders, back prior, they peaked then in 1987, 2005, and up to now. Land price peaks first. It's so useful to know. This is not something that's just been happening the prior 3 cycles. Fred Harrison showed it in his Power in the Land, and I quoted that. You can see the land value peak, US building cycle peak, and then recession. It's consistent. So now we would be starting to expect US land values are in the process of peaking. It's not a homogeneous market, it won't all happen at once. But I think this is valuable information to help with your stock trading. Which leads to practice. So a few years back, I had a couple of people approach me and say, Phil, we should start an 18.6 fund, which we did back in 2020 something or other, early. Now you can see The red line, the blue line's the All Ords, black line is the MSCI World Index, which is what we benchmark against. And then how we've been going so far, if I may say, reasonable. I'd like to make one other comment here. It's just, I can't take it too far, but me personally, what I have observed about the way that funds have to be run here in Australia, it is guaranteeing non-performance. So, for example, to get our fund actually up and running, to satisfy compliance and everything else, we have to have 15 stocks in the fund. We have to have that because they consider that safe, because it's the only way to make money. You have to diversify. It's a load of crop. I think the more diversified you are, the less performance is going to be. You should be in the stocks that are performing best. Also, one of our top performers, we had LYC. Over the past 3 months, we doubled our money. So taking LYC, can you see the Mexican Pete's? It gave you warning. Not only that, we had a reasonable idea that into 2025, it was the time for commodities to start running. So that's what we were looking at. And we got in a little bit early, but that's all right. I think by there, here, if you missed that, by there, stop loss just underneath it, goes up, you get accumulation. You should all know it's accumulation. Add to your position. Bring your stop loss up to under there and keep adding the higher it goes. Funds can't do that, because if we keep adding to a winning position, it will take us above 7% threshold of our positions, and that's a no-no. The government and other people don't like it because they say you're putting all your eggs in one basket. Okay, that's all I'll say on that. All right, but anyway, we're going okay. So, the reason why most economists around the world, fund managers and everybody else, the reason why this isn't common knowledge, the reason why you haven't heard that before, is because Henry George and what he stood for, the abolition of all taxes, save that upon land, it was so offensive to America's 10 wealthiest landowning families that they had to write that information out of economic textbooks. Up until the First World War, economists believed that there were 3 factors of production: land, labour and capital. And that allowed Henry George to see the function of land. All economists knew it all depended on the land. They all knew that. And up until 1914, every single economist, you studied cycles. That was your main reason to be. After that, when Maynard Keynes come along, and the landowners of all of the major US education institutions, they decided, what are we going to do? So then they reduced 3 factors of production down to 2, capital and labour. Land is now capital. So this stuff is not taught, will never be taught in universities. You have to get to know it from somebody who studies land economics. If you wish to see that for yourself, this is the book to buy. The Corruption of Economics. It's the only conspiracy. You can think of QAnon and everything else just going to utter rubbish. This is the one you have to know. The greatest conspiracy of all. The Corruption of Economics. Once you get to see the land and what it stands for, it just opens up your vision. You can never get fooled or kidded again by what other economists say or don't say. So if you're listening to the opinion of an economist and he doesn't understand the land market, stop listening. I think that was it. Questions? Phew.
Questions for Phil? I'm looking at Keith. Surely you'll have to. Yeah, I know you're going to come up with something.
Yeah, Phil, thanks very much.
Keith.
When the top does come, are all stocks going to go down, or is there something we can put our money in that we're not going to lose it?
Well, again, I try not to get into opinions. Let me take this back a bit. Oh, I haven't got, yeah. There are two ways at the moment, and I think the jury's out. We get the normal thing, land price turns down, which I think it's doing now. The housing stocks, the land price peaks first. The proxy for that is US housing stocks. Then the land price comes down, stock market peaks, then commodities peak, usual order. I don't think there will be anywhere to hide myself, which begs the question, where do you put your money? But you could be on the short side. There's plenty of ETFs now that can handle that side of things, which is what I'm trying to look to myself. I don't think the market this time will make it very easy. There are so many conflicting things. So we've got to see what happens on that. My subscribers will get, in another month or two, they will get out 2026. We have already done, the class I did last year for all my subscribers included 2026. We took that right out to 2032. It's looking very interesting. It will depend on which curve things actually follow. It's been extraordinary. If you have a look at what happened 20 and 60 years ago and combine them into one curve, the current market's been following that for at least 5 or 6 years. It's been unbelievable, as you've seen. Yes, it's been uncanny. Will it continue? Don't know. But counting from what Gann would have done, he had a very good, his 5-year cycle and his 10-year cycle. If you take the low in October in 2023, 5 years out, October 2028, it's looking very good. Split that in the middle, you get February or April next year. So 2.5 years, 30 months. I don't think there will be anywhere to hide. On the other side, there's every chance there could be some government default. If we get a government default, especially the US, then the Fed would be printing money. That wouldn't be good for the dollar, wouldn't be good for confidence. The place you wouldn't want to have your money, if that was the case, the place where you wouldn't want to have your money would be in treasuries, because price would be going up the yield up, price down. And if that was the case, if there was more serious inflation, then to some extent the place where you've got to have your money is in hard assets, particularly land, stocks, and gold. So at the moment with gold, it is forecasting ominous stuff. So it remains to be seen. No, so there's no hiding this time, but there's a lot of ETFs that you can get the other side, right? But picking the top, the markets could easily just go sideways for ages. So I'm not saying it's going to be easy. Yes?
Can I get you to come up and ask the question? While you're coming up, I've got a question from online.
Yes.
Would you still recommend to buy property in SMSFs in this winner's curse phase?
Oh, I can't give financial advice because I don't know the position of the person who asked the question and all those various things, right? I can tell you what I've done, but again, I own my own apartment outright now, have done for ages. There's no debt on it. I own some of the other stuff that I've got also outright. The only mortgage I've got left is in one of my properties in France. But I say that because I'd have been doing that regardless because of the stage I'm at in my life, right? Mid-60s, yes? So I want to downscale a little bit. I also got to think about how to pass this on family-wise. So it's sort of a bit independent of the market. So I've wanted to cash up as such. But if we get a big default and more inflation, cash might not be the thing to have. But what I've always said to people is that the number one priority as we go forward, the number one priority because 120 years ago, 1907, we had a major spike in interest rates. So that's twice 60. So 1907 is a year to study. That's in my book. You can have a look. That's why I wrote it there. You can have a look about the sort of stuff that happened. Have I done the right thing? But for my stage of life, it just doesn't matter. So if we get that spike, inflation, so again, sorry for the question, but I can't. Yeah, okay. But whatever it is now, what I can say is I resolved in the winner's curse phase, the worst thing you can do is take on debt that you can't afford. History demonstrates in the winner's curse phase, you can't take on debt that you can't afford. So you shouldn't be going to mum and dad to buy your first home or even your second home. You have to be trying to present yourself good to the banks a year or two after that, yes? I think that sort of common sense, really, yeah.
Elvio Pugliese, parallels to the Australian market with the 18.6, any data or opinions in regards to that? And the 18.6 with the American market, is that a general right across the American real estate market, or is that specifically a couple of main states? As you know, in Australia, everything's gone up except Victoria.
Yes.
So.
All I study is the US market. I treat it as homogenous in a theoretical type scenario to say there is in the US an 18.6 year cycle. It's clear if you study the history. But then you have to be smart enough to then realise that if you're in a regional location, there are going to be other factors that will add to the price of land or subtract to the price of land. So if you've got lead running through the pipes of your main city, like in Flint, well, this is probably not going to add to land price. But if you've got, say, out of Denver Way or whatever, another airport being planned, then that probably will attract infrastructure. We know that infrastructure adds to land. And so Florida, with its beaches and everything else, always popular right through the cycle. So you have to add that on top of the theoretical construct of an 18.6 year cycle. So there's always, it's different region to region. And this time it looks like Florida may have peaked first, may also in Austin, because that's where the attention was coming out of the whole boom with tech and everything else that was happening. Same up in a bit north in Seattle and stuff like that, right? So it's just a guideline. Australia doesn't have as such, well, let me say this way, Australia has never gone into a recession unless America's gone first. So America will have to turn down before Australia does. But that doesn't mean land price can peak and just go sideways for a while like it has in Melbourne. But if you've ever seen one of my co-assistants, Kathy Stacey, present, she studies Australia, she has some very good data, which we present to all our subscribers.
So I think you've answered part of this question from online. How does the Australian property and stock markets follow this cycle if all is based on the US?
Yes. Yes, well, I think, yeah.
Yep. And the next question is, will Oz land market be more immune to a drastic downturn due to the fact that landowners are personally liable for the home loans, whereas in the US they can walk away with their houses? Or will Australia also experience a massive drop?
Well, that's what we saw last time. I mean, Americans can just walk away. Slightly different now, since a lot of, in the US, so many funds went in and bought up all the houses at the bottom. Now it's quite a huge market, so they're all as buying to rent. Australia, I don't study Australia in detail, but it seems to me our land prices are as unaffordable as ever. And I don't think we'll have China to bail us out so much for the next cycle. But certainly history says America has to go first. And it's usually about a year later that Australia starts to see those effects. But hey, you know, every cycle has to happen a little bit different. If it wasn't different, we'd all see it and act accordingly beforehand and negate some of the consequences. So yeah, so we've got to see.
Any other questions for Phil? Julian, do you want to come up?
Thank you for your talk. Just a question, would you think the 5% deposit insurance thing that's just come out for Australian housing, wouldn't you say that was the canary in the coal mine to get anyone who wasn't levered up fully levered?
I would.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, that to me was like the end of the end of the end of the end.
Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
Okay.
A funny thing happens towards every single extreme if you look back. And of course, as far as banks are involved in easy money, it really started from about the late 60s onwards. You go back and You could look at the 1920s, but not so much in Australia. And the way everything's formed now. The real estate cycle to me, what I learned when I was writing my book, I learned that the real estate cycle in the United States seemed to be a living, breathing thing. Almost even better than AI. I found the whole thing speaking to me in the sense that as you get into that winner's curse phase, that final 2 years that Fred named so well, just about everything seems to happen to bring all of the people into the market finally in as much debt as possible. And you can see that governments, you know, around the world, they want to be helpful, of course, and they try to be helpful, and they want people to be buying their own home and everything else, so they create these schemes. But of course, they're only creating these schemes because land prices, or they see it as house prices, land price is so high already. So they say, well, what do we do? Well, let's come up with a scheme to get people in, which of course pushes land price even higher, because the gain goes into the land value. So as soon as that scheme's announced, up went the land price, even more. And of course, those younger buyers come in, they're in debt. Now I noticed with the tariffs that have been coming in, with which the current US president seems to love so much, small businesses are having a hard time, probably every small business, in a sense that doesn't have a lot of cash sitting on the balance sheet, and let's face it, who does? The tariffs, when they apply, to get your goods out of customs, you have to pay the duties and the tariff. They have to be paid up front before the goods are sold. And so there are a number of small companies in America at the moment. They don't have those funds to hand. So in order to get the goods to sell them, they have to pay the tariff first. They are going to the lending market to get the loan to get the goods in. Then they'll pay it off as the goods come in and get sold. That, of course, is called a bit like bridging finance. They're going to a lot of newfound small banks and private credit providers, which are being underwritten by big Wall Street banks. The interest rate that's being charged on those bridging finance loans is 20%. Like, I mean, hello? You couldn't get a better time for that to happen as far as the real estate cycle goes. Brings everybody into debt. So the way I see it, you know, things are unfolding. So the government scheme like that, I mean, we know it was done in the mid-2000s. We know it was done in 1987, 88 to get people onto the housing market. Heck, I bought my first home at 18.5% with some assistance. Anyway, what do you do? Good question, thanks. Time for one more?
There's one more, we can squeeze one more in.
Have you looked at, you know, like commercial land versus housing stock land? Have you found a distinction that's a pattern?
Yeah, it's all those sort of questions. I don't get into that myself per se. I allow the investor and the people I speak to, once they've learnt the market, they can go away and apply that themselves. And a lot of people have, and I've had some fantastic information come back. Generally though, I can say on the downside, the housing prices don't collapse like a commercial price can. Because at the end of the day, people have to live somewhere. So if you get and again, what recovers first is a house in the prime best location. Always about where that location is. Same with industrial, a sense, I guess. So no, I don't do that. I leave that to people once they've formulated and seen the overall structure of an 18.6 year cycle. Yes, and of course it's all different. So you have to sort of work that out, how it goes. And I should probably say that as well. And farmland's another thing, right? So I don't, you know, again, it's different. Farmland around the place can be far more dependent on the price of cotton or wheat or copper or anything else, right? So you can't necessarily say, well, up in northern Queensland, you might see a regular 18.6 year cycle. You have to have that sort of bit of common sense to say, well, but once you see it, once you begin to see what actually influences land value, you do become a much smarter investor. So you don't get fooled by some of those its and bits and stuff that's a bit outside the cycle.
You did say at the start that they may not be happy at the time
Yeah.
you finished. Everybody's sitting there stunned. I was going to take a quote from Henry George.
Oh, yes.
It's not the business of government to make men virtuous or religious, or to preserve the fool from the consequences of his own folly. Hopefully, what we've listened to today with Phil is we're not the fools, and we're not going to have the follies. For me, the advantage of being a technical analyst is that it's all written in the charts.
Yes.
We just need to look at it. And if we start looking at, thinking about how he started the day with David Bird, and he was saying, look left and then look right, that's what we should be doing. Look left to understand what's happened, to understand what's going to happen going right. We have a huge advantage over the majority of people. We just need to make sure we use that advantage. Thank you so much, Phil.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.